Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, well, a mystery so profound it makes other historical puzzles seem like child's play. We're talking about the Voynich Manuscript, a book that, for centuries, has resisted every single attempt to be read. It's this illustrated codex, right? Full of content no one understands, written by someone anonymous, in a script that's totally unique, and a language we just can't crack.
And that's precisely its enduring allure, isn't it? I mean, this isn't just some dusty old book. It's arguably the world's most famous unsolved cryptogram. It's baffled generations. We're talking brilliant minds, code breakers from both world wars, linguists, countless passionate amateurs. It's a real riddle wrapped in an enigma.
So, our mission for this deep dive is to explore everything we do know about this incredible thing. We'll look at its physical form, its completely baffling text, those bizarre illustrations, and, all the attempts, some ingenious, some, well, frankly, misguided, to unlock its secrets. By the end, you'll get why it remains one of history's greatest ciphers, or maybe, just maybe, one of its most elaborate hoaxes. Okay, so let's start with the basics. Physically, what is this mysterious object? Imagine a codex that's a handwritten book crafted on vellum, that carefully prepared animal hide. It's about 225 by 160 millimeters, roughly a standard paperback size, but it's thick, like 5 centimeters thick. Quite substantial. Today, it's kept safe at the Voynich Library at Yale. Its official tag is MS-408. Its modern story, and how it got its name, really kicks off with its rediscovery. This fascinating bookseller, Wilfred M. Voynich, got his hands on it back in 1912.
Right, and that acquisition over 100 years ago now led to probably the most crucial scientific fact we have about it, the carbon-14 dating. In 2009, they tested 4 samples of the parchment. The results were remarkably precise, placing its creation somewhere between 1404 and 1438. With 95% probability. That dating was an absolute game changer. It just completely shifted the timeline and, crucially, ruled out so many popular theories about who wrote it and when, theories that had been around for ages.
Yeah, you look at it, and the first impression is just this mix of intricate detail and sheer bewilderment. It's packed with these illustrations. Weird plants, elaborate star charts, these strange bathing figures, weird pipe systems, and all of it next to that completely baffling, unreadable script. Voyniches, they call it. It's visually fascinating, but leaves you totally stumped.
To really get it, we need to dig into the book itself, its actual structure, codicology, that's the technical term. So the cover you see now, that's goatskin, probably 18th or 19th century, likely added by the Jesuits when they owned it. But there's evidence, like specific patterns of wormholes, that suggest the original binding might have been wood covered in leather. Interesting detail. And the vellum itself. It was clearly prepared with care, but it's not perfect. You can see flaws like uneven edges, small holes. Some even look like they were stitched up way back when, and stretch marks. But here's a key point. Microscopic analysis, multispectral imaging, all done fairly recently, confirmed no signs of erased writing. None. So it's not a palimpsest. They didn't scrape off an older text to write this. Whatever is there seems to be the original content for this specific writing effort.
Okay, so original content. That's huge. Now, the manuscript today has about 240 pages. That's 102 folios, organized into 18 quires or sections. But what really jumps out are these displigables, the fold-out pages. They're all different sizes. Some unfold to 3, 4, even 5 times the page width. And there's this one massive one, like almost 45 by 45 centimeters, folded multiple times, like hidden posters inside the book. Really quite something. But here's where it gets really tricky. The missing pages. We know 14 folios are gone, and the numbering system, which seems to be quite old, shows gaps where those pages should be. So the numbering was done before they went missing, which means the book was once even bigger. What does that imply? Was crucial information lost?
Exactly. And it gets even more complex because there's strong evidence, really strong, that the current order of the pages and sections isn't the original order. Things seem mixed up. For example, you've got 3 pharmaceutical bifolios, these double-page spreads scattered across 2 different quires, the 15th and 19th. Why? And some of the herbarium pages, the plant drawings, they show different handwriting styles and text patterns, but they're just sort of randomly distributed, not grouped together. In the biological section, there are 2 pages, folios 78V and 81R, that have this design of flowing water connecting them. But the design only makes visual sense if they're originally facing each other, which they aren't now. Plus, the mark for quire 9 is in the wrong place, and you can see old sewing holes from a previous binding. It all points very strongly to the book being taken apart and rebound at some point. So René Zandbergen, who's a major Voynich researcher, he's pieced together this possible history. He suggests the pages were prepared, the illustrations outlined, then the text written. The planned order got messed up somehow.
Maybe it was bound once and taken apart for painting, and maybe that's when 6 bifolios got lost. Then later, trimming might have lost folios 12 and 74.
What this forensic work tells us is that the book we have today might be a rearranged, incomplete version of whatever the creator originally intended. It adds another layer of mystery.
It really makes you wonder what the full thing looked like, doesn't it? Okay, let's trace its journey through time. This historical path is almost as weird as the text itself. We know it's 15th century from the carbon dating, and the style of the art and writing fits that period too.
Yeah, the consensus now points to Central Europe, maybe Germany, maybe Northern Italy. Sandbergen uses the term Alpine, suggesting a mix of influences. And there's a strong clue, those swallowtail battlements on the rosettes page. The V-shaped notches on castle walls. That's a Ghibelline style, very common in northern Italy from the 14th century onwards, places like Verona. But then again, you see similar zodiac cycles in German manuscripts from the 15th century. So Alpine, that mix feels right.
And its early ownership is wrapped in legend. There's this famous story from a letter by Johannes Marcus Marci claiming Emperor Rodolfo II had bought it for a massive price to 600 gold ducats. But here's the kicker. There's absolutely no record of the sale in the court accounts. So, a great story, but unproven.
The first owner we can actually confirm, with physical proof, is Jacobus Horczycki de Tepanek. He was a physician, a pharmacist. His signature is on the first page, but it's faded. You can only really see it under UV light now. He was made noble by Rodolfo II in 1608 for curing him. So the signature must be after that. Maybe the emperor gave him the book. Or maybe it was payment for a debt. We just don't know for sure.
Okay, so from Horczycki, we know a guy named George Bartius owned it in 1639, and he's the one who sent a partial copy to the famous Jesuit scholar, Athanasius Kircher. Bartius apparently guessed it was medical somehow.
Right, and Kircher's role is important because his reply letter from 1639 is the earliest written mention we have of the manuscript. Kircher basically admitted defeat. He called it a book full of mysterious steganography secret writing and said it needed application rather than comprehension. He couldn't crack it.
So it then ended up at the Roman College for over 200 years, part of Kircher's huge collection. And it had a close call. It was almost confiscated by King Victor Emmanuel II in 1873. But apparently the head Jesuit, Petrus Bex, managed to get permission to keep a bunch of books, including this one. Eventually, though, the Jesuits needed funds, and they decided to sell off some manuscripts in 1912.
Which brings us right back to Wilfrid Voynich. He bought this collection, 380 manuscripts in total, from the Jesuits. But the whole deal was done under strict secrecy. And that secrecy, whatever the reason, forced Voynich to invent his story about finding it in a chest in some old castle. He needed a provenance story, and then he famously promoted it as Roger Bacon's ciphered manuscript. That linked it to a famous name and really captured the public's imagination, even though we now know Bacon couldn't have written it.
And finally, where it is now. After Voynich died, it went to his wife, Ethel, then his secretary, Anne Nill. She sold it in 1961 to the New York book dealer Hans Peter Krauss for $24,500. Krauss couldn't find a buyer willing to meet his price, so in 1969 he generously donated it to Yale's Beinecke Library. And now, thankfully, it's fully digitized, available online for anyone to study, and the Spanish publisher Siloé has even made these incredibly exact replicas, facsimiles.
Which is great for researchers. Now, speaking of authorship, that 15th century date really throws out most of the old theories. It makes it highly likely the author, or maybe authors just lost to history, unknown. And yeah, there's debate about whether it was one person or several involved.
Let's talk about the biggest early suspect, Roger Bacon, the 13th century English philosopher. Why was he such a popular candidate?
Well, it mostly came from that Marci letter claiming Rodolfo II. I thought it was Bacon's. And Voynich himself really pushed this idea. Bacon was known to be interested in codes and hiding secrets, so it seemed plausible back then.
Yeah.
And this led to one of the most sensational episodes in Voynich history, William Newbold's decipherment in the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
Newbold claimed Bacon used a microscope, which obviously didn't exist in the 13th century, to hide tiny Greek shorthand letters inside the main Voynich characters. And he claimed these microletters revealed amazing scientific discoveries, like the spiral shape of the Andromeda galaxy or even human sperm cells. It was wild stuff.
Wow. Okay, so how did that hold up? Obviously, the microscope part is impossible, but the rest?
It fell apart completely. In 1931, John Manfred Manley did a thorough takedown. He showed the shorthand was just random cracks in the ink, natural aging on the vellum. And Newbold's method of finding anagrams was just way too flexible. You could basically find anything you wanted. And then, of course, the carbon dating hammered the final nail in the coffin. No way it was from the 13th century. So Roger Bacon is out, which also affects the John Dee and Edward Kelly theory, the Elizabethan occultists. Yale professor Robert Brumbaugh suggested in the 70s that maybe Dee or Kelly faked it in the 16th century to sell to Emperor Rodolfo II. They might have even planted the Bacon connection to make it seem older and more valuable. Tim Mervyn had a variation, suggesting Dee passed unfinished work to Kelly. But again, the 15th century date just completely rules out Dee and Kelly. They lived much too late.
Right, and there were others too, right? Like Anthony Ascham.
Yeah, Lionel Strong, a physician, claimed it was by Ascham, a 16th century doctor, and written in some kind of medieval English cipher about women's ailments.
Mm-hmm.
But cryptologists looked at his work and basically said it made no sense. It wasn't a viable decryption. So that one's out too. So the big takeaway here is, while these are fascinating stories, the science, the carbon dating and careful analysis rule out these famous names. We're still looking. And maybe we should be looking for authors, plural. Prescott Currier, Lisa Fagan Davis.
Yeah.
They've identified potentially different handwriting styles, maybe up to 5. Suggests it could have been a team effort, or maybe someone was making a clean copy of someone else's draft. Complicates the picture.
Okay, so let's dive into the text itself, the Voyniches. What does it actually look like on the page? It's written top down, left to right, generally line by line. The left margin is surprisingly straight, almost like they used a ruler. You don't see many corrections, which is odd. And it's broken into these neat little paragraphs. But the writing system itself, it's unique, found nowhere else.
And the characters, the glyphs, are fascinating. Some look familiar, a bit like Latin letters. You see shapes reminiscent of A, C, I, and O. Others look like Arabic numerals, maybe a 2, 4, 8, 9, or even like medieval abbreviations scribes used. Then you have these really distinct gallows or forked characters transcribed often as T, K, P, F. They often show up at the start of paragraphs, sometimes with extra loops. And weirdly, on the very first page, there are 2 initials highlighted in red. One looks a bit like the symbol for Aries, but they never appear again in the whole book, just once. Strange.
And trying to transcribe this must be a nightmare, right? How do you know if 2 slightly different shapes are the same letter or different letters? Or maybe joined together?
Exactly. That's a huge challenge. Is it variation in handwriting or a distinct glyph or a ligature 2 letters joined? That difficulty led to transcription systems like EVA, the European Voynich alphabet. It's basically a way to represent the shapes using standard keyboard characters. Makes it easier to study electronically, maybe even pronounceable, but, and this is important, it's not meant to represent the actual meaning or sound, it's just a tool for analysis. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. The text has very distinct statistical properties. Words tend to be short, average maybe 4 or 5 characters, very few one-letter words, very few really long words, and it obeys Zipf's law. That's a pattern you see in pretty much all human languages where a few words are super common and most words are rare, like the and I, and a in English. So that's just some kind of linguistic structure.
But there's always a but with the Voynich, isn't there?
Right. But the character combinations are extremely predictable, way more predictable than you'd expect in a natural language. This gives it abnormally low entropy. Entropy measures randomness or unpredictability. Voyniches has very low randomness. It's almost like certain letters have to follow certain other letters or can only appear at the beginning, middle, or end of a word. Highly structured. More like maybe a tonal language like Hawaiian, or even musical notation in some ways. Jorge Stolfi proposed this 3-layer model. He sees most words as having a prefix, a root, and a suffix structure, like building blocks. Prescott Currier noticed that the line itself seems important. Character frequencies change significantly at the start and end of lines, and words rarely repeat across a line break. And maybe the weirdest thing, the text is incredibly repetitive. You see the same word, or almost the same word, repeated 2, 3, sometimes more times in a row, or on nearby lines. Very, very strange for natural language.
So what does that mean? Does all that structure point to a real language, just one with really rigid rules? Or is it the sign of a cipher designed to look complex? Or is it just a trick? A clever way to generate nonsense that looks meaningful?
That's the absolute core of the debate. It's too structured to be random scribbling, but too weirdly structured and repetitive to easily fit known language patterns. Which leads to the question, are there other clues? Yep, any writing we can read. Well, there's marginalia, notes of the margins and such. Some look original, like you find little Latin letters or the German word rot for red written inside some plant drawings, probably color notes for the illustrator written by the main scribe. Then there are later additions, pencil marks like A, B, C, probably from owners trying to make sense of it. But crucially, in the zodiac section, the names of the months like Zhong for Gemini are written in a different hand, in a script that looks like it could be Northern French or maybe Occitan. That's a strong clue for its origin, separate from the main text. And on Folio 66V, there's a phrase that looks like Den Mustel or something similar. It might be German or Dutch, could mean pulp, or maybe something legal like a widow's share.
Unclear. And right at the very end, on the last page, folio 116b, there's a really odd text. They call it the Michitones text.
It looks like a mix of mangled Latin and maybe German, with some little sketches.
They're mysterious. These little bits are tantalizing, but they don't unlock the main script.
Okay, let's shift focus to the pictures, because honestly, they're just as baffling as the text, maybe more immediately striking. Almost every page has them. And it's clear the outlines were drawn first, before the text was written around them. So definitely planned, not just random doodles.
Yeah, and people really disagree about the artistic quality. Some dismiss them as clumsy or childish. Wilfred Voynich himself called the manuscript an ugly duckling. But others see real care and precision, especially in the details. Maybe the artist wasn't going for realism, but for symbolic accuracy or clarity for whatever purpose the book served. We do know a bit about the materials from scientific tests in 2009. The ink is mostly iron gall ink, common for the period. The blue pigment is ground azurite. The green is some kind of organic copper complex. The reddish-brown is lead oxide, probably red lead. Material facts, but they don't tell us what the pictures mean.
Right. So let's walk through the main sections based on the illustrations. First, there's the botanical section. Lots of plant drawings, usually 1 or 2 per page. But these aren't plants you'd recognize from a field guide. Some have these impossible features like stems splitting and rejoining or roots growing out of tree stumps. Fantastical. And others have weird little additions. A tiny dragon here, a couple of snakes there, roots shaped like claws or wings or a lion's head, even human faces sometimes. Are they symbolic? Memory aids? Who knows?
Then you get the astronomical and zodiacal sections. Lots of circular diagrams. Some show scattered stars, sun faces, moon faces, sometimes with flower-like centers. And the zodiac pages are particularly weird. You have these small, naked female figures, often holding stars, and they frequently seem to be emerging from, well, they look like cans or baskets. Very strange imagery. Also, the zodiac sequence starts with Pisces, not Aries, which is unusual, and the pages for Capricorn and Aquarius are missing. Another gap in the puzzle.
Next up, the cosmological section. More circular diagrams, but these are even harder to classify. Geometric, complex. The absolute star here is the rosettes page. It's this huge fold-out, 6 pages wide, with this incredibly intricate central drawing surrounded by smaller circles linked by paths or tubes. And on this page, you see tiny drawings of buildings, castles, and walls, including those Ghibelline battlements. We mentioned the V-shaped ones. That's a really strong clue pointing towards northern Italy or that Central European Alpine region.
And remember William Newbold. He wrongly claimed one of the diagrams on this page showed the Andromeda Galaxy, which of course you couldn't see like that in the 15th century without a telescope. Just another example of wishful thinking in Voynich research.
Then we hit the biological section, and this might be the weirdest part of the whole book. It's page after page of these naked female figures. They often have sort of swollen bellies, prominent hips, and they're shown inside or connected to these elaborate systems of pipes, tubes, pools, bathtubs. Sometimes they're holding things like little crosses or rings. People have guessed it relates to bathing therapies or alchemy or maybe anatomy or gynecology. But honestly, it's deeply mysterious. What is going on there?
It's profoundly strange. And then comes the pharmaceutical section.
Yeah.
This shows rows of what look like plant parts, roots, leaves next to these very ornate jars or containers. Some containers look empty. Others seem to hold green or blue liquids. Some people have even suggested the containers look a bit like early microscopes, but that's probably a stretch, or more likely pharmaceutical vessels.
And finally, the last section is mostly text. They call it the recipe section. The main visual cue here is these little star-shaped bullet points, often in red, usually with 7 or 8 points. They seem to mark the beginning of new entries or paragraphs, suggesting lists of instructions, formulas, or, well, recipes of some kind.
Okay, so we've looked at the book, its history, the bizarre text, the baffling pictures, which brings us back inevitably to the million-dollar question. What does it all mean? Is it a lost language, a super complex code, or just history's most successful prank?
Well, as we saw, the carbon dating really cleared the deck of many older theories, especially about authorship. And it helps explain why early decryption attempts failed so spectacularly. Newbold's microscopic Greek shorthand, just ink cracks, as John Manfred Manley showed. Joseph Martin Feely, Nicholas Gibbs claiming it was abbreviated Latin. Scholars looked and said, nope, this doesn't actually produce coherent Latin. The evidence just wasn't there.
So many attempts based on forcing it into a known language or cipher system seem to have failed. What about other approaches? Thinking outside the box. People have certainly tried. William Friedman, the legendary codebreaker, he suspected it might be an artificial or synthetic language, like Esperanto, but much earlier. But the text seems too systematic in some ways, and the idea of constructed languages wasn't really a big thing back in the early 15th century. The idea is a simple substitution cipher, or requires a code book. Probably too slow to write something this long. Lionel Strong's complex medieval English cipher. Cryptologists couldn't make heads or tails of his method. Robert Brumbaugh's numerical cipher, tied to the Kelly theory, which the dating disproves. So, okay, if not a cipher of a known language, maybe it's a real language, just one we don't know, or one written very strangely. Lots of proposals there, too. James R. Child suggested an unknown North Germanic dialect back in '76, maybe related to Gothic or Old Danish. John Stojko claimed it was Ukrainian written without vowels, but his methods were seen as pretty arbitrary. Leo Levitov argued for a pidgin language used by Cathar heretics, historically and linguistically shaky. James Finn even proposed visually coded Hebrew from aliens. Yeah, that one didn't get much traction. More recently, AI has gotten involved. Greg Kondrak and Bradley Hauer trained an AI in 2018. It suggested Hebrew, processed through anagrams, alphagrams. But their translation required so many interpretive leaps it wasn't widely accepted. Edith Sherwood thought maybe a young Leonardo da Vinci wrote it using Italian anagrams. Fun idea, but again, the dating makes it impossible. Leonardo was born way too late. Some more promising, or at least intriguing, ideas. Stephen Bax, back in 2014, claimed a partial decoding of a few plant names in other words. He thought it might be a Near Eastern or Asian language, and definitely not a hoax. Jacques Guy and Jorge Stolfi looked at tonal languages, Chinese, Vietnamese, Tibetan. They noted statistical similarities like word structure and the prevalence of short words. And historically, East-West contact wasn't impossible then. Zbigniew Banaszak even floated Manchu as a possibility. And then there's the Nahuatl theory. This one's fascinating but controversial. Researchers like Comegys, Tucker, Talbert, Yannick, they argue it's 16th century Mexican. They point to illustrations that look like New World plants and animals, claim they found atacamite, a mineral mostly from the Americas in the green pigment, and see similarities between Voynich, Gliss, and Nahuatl ligatures. But, big buts here. The dating is wrong, 15th versus 16th century. The plant identifications are debatable. The presence of atacamite isn't definitively proven, and it can be found in Europe rarely. And similar ligatures existed in European scripts. So it faces major hurdles. And finally, Gerard Cheshire claimed in 2019 it was proto-Romance. That didn't go over well with medieval language experts either.
Wow. So many theories, so many dead ends, which leads us to maybe the most provocative idea, the one that kind of undercuts everything else. What if it's all just a fake? An incredibly elaborate, clever hoax. Could someone in the 15th century have just made it all up, generated nonsense text that just looks real?
The hoax hypothesis. It's compelling precisely because it can explain some of the text's weirdness, especially the statistics, without needing any actual meaning. Gordon Rugg, back in 2003, did this famous demonstration. He showed how using a simple tool called a Cardano grill, basically a card with holes cut out, placed over a table of syllables or word parts, could generate text with Voynich-like statistical properties. You figured you could write a page in maybe an hour or two this way, meaning a clever hoaxer could potentially create the whole book in a few months. Plausible time frame. And Torsten Tim later proposed an autocopy method, noticing how often identical or near-identical chunks of text appear close together, suggesting the scribe might have just been copying bits of text from elsewhere on the page or nearby pages to fill space quickly. What these hoax theories show is that it's possible to create text like the Voyniches without any meaning behind it. The paradox remains. It seems too structured to be pure gibberish, but too weird and repetitive to be a typical natural language or a standard cipher.
So after this deep dive, where does that leave us? You've explored this incredible book, a manuscript that's outlasted whoever made it, baffled brilliant minds for centuries, and just refuses to give up its secrets.
Pretty much. The parchment tells us when it was made, roughly. The illustrations give tantalizing clues about where, maybe northern Italy or nearby. The language, well, it has structure, but we can't read it. And that ultimate question just hangs there. Is it profound lost knowledge, a window into a forgotten world? Or is it just the most successful, longest-running intellectual prank in history? We still don't know.
And maybe that's the point. The Voynich manuscript invites you to think. In a world obsessed with solving every puzzle, decoding every secret, what if some mysteries aren't meant to be solved? What if its real value, its genius, isn't in the answer, but in its power to keep us asking questions, to keep sparking our curiosity century after century, a mystery perhaps designed to remain one?